You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface, and assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant. And they'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Times leads on the Foreign Office telling British nationals to leave Ukraine after the US warned that Russia could invade within days. That story is also on the front of the Daily Mail. And it's the lead for the Mirror, which has the headline, "Get Out." That message also makes the front of the Daily Express. The FT reports on talks between the US and its allies over Ukraine as President Biden fears an attack from Russia is close. The Daily Telegraph quotes the US President's national security advisor, who said Russia could invade Ukraine any day now. Leading on a different story, the Eye says senior Conservatives have warned the Prime Minister to not hold on to power if the police investigation finds he broke COVID laws. And The Guardian reports that the Treasury is pushing for most free COVID testing to be scrapped to save billions of pounds. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant. Welcome to you both. Good to see you. Let's start with the Mail front page and that warning to Brits to leave, get out now underlined. Susie.
Yes. So all the newspapers seem to be in agreement that there is an imminent invasion in Ukraine. This seems to come out really as a result of a world leaders video call that was called by Joe Biden, who seems to have shared probably military intelligence with other world leaders saying that the troop build-up and everything else means something is very imminent. It's going to happen fairly soon. And what we do know about the British citizens who would be in Ukraine is they're people who are there because they've married or because they've got family ties. They're quite deep into the country. They're not just there working or something and can get out easily. They're not going to want to run away. They're going to want to stay with their families. So they may not wish to leave necessarily. I was speaking to a Ukrainian yesterday who said that there's just no concern about this in the country. The Ukrainian leaders said that what Biden has said is nothing particularly new. And they seem to just their tone of their sort of social media feeds is very much that this is all going swimmingly as far as they're concerned. There's American and UK troops helping them out with things. They're being supplied with arms. They don't have great concern. Of course, all that depends upon the fact that NATO and the West don't abandon the 40 million Ukrainians to Vladimir Putin. What we do need to remember, of course, is that Ukraine is not part of Russia. It was once part of a Soviet republic, but it's not part of the Russian Federation. And if Putin does invade, he's invading a country on the edge of Europe. And if you let him do that, what happens next? He seems to think that he has control over that place, or he should have control over it. The people who live in Ukraine disagree with him on that point. And they speak Ukrainian, not Russian. They have Ukrainian traditions, not Russian traditions. So if NATO does abandon them and say, well, Mr. Putin, you can roll your tanks over there if you like, but we'll be terribly cross with you if you do, which seems to be about the limit of what the Western leaders are saying they're going to do. There'll be some sanctions, there'll be some concerns, there'll be condemnation, but basically they're just going to say, look, please don't do it. We'd be cross with you. I don't know if that's necessarily going to stop him, if that's what he wants to do.
In that call of leaders with NATO and the European leaders, the Prime Minister said an invasion would be devastating and destructive. And Downing Street have said that he's insisted it must be absolutely clear that there will be a heavy package of economic sanctions ready to go should Russia attack. So that's the warning, should there be an incursion into Ukraine. Madeline.
Yes, absolutely, and also interestingly, we've had interventions from various Ukrainian diplomats who've been saying that actually it would be better if they were to immediately publish the extent of these sanctions to really ram it home very clearly to Moscow what they could expect in the event of proceeding with this kind of action. But today's been a day where, as Susie rightly says, the tone remains pretty much the same in Ukraine, but the tone of all the world leaders and many of the dignitaries seems to have seen a dramatic shift today. What we saw we saw that very much at the White House press conference earlier today. And even though Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden's national security advisor, went to great lengths to say that, this wasn't sort of imminent invasions shouldn't be taken as a certainty, that this was more a case of them preparing for every eventuality. There's no doubt that when you start potentially withdrawing diplomats and you start warning nationals to get out of there immediately for their own safety, this suggests things have got very serious indeed, and cannot help but spark, greater panic within Ukraine. And it's one of those occasions where you really have to hope that the intelligence on this is out on this occasion, because the implications for Ukraine and its people are truly horrific.
Yes, and Jake Sullivan also making mention of the fact that means to leave the country might not be open for much longer, and there could be an incursion within days. I mean, it does seem that there has been some intelligence to allow him to say that, and there is some movement, some sense of urgency now. Susie, would you agree?
Yeah, and Joe Biden's the one with the satellites, so if he thinks that, I'm going to take it as I was read, because I can't see that. But we also know that the Russian army, while it's very big, is not a very good army. It's mostly conscripts. And at the moment, a lot of them are fly camping. They're under canvas, they're in bad conditions, and they're on the edge of Ukraine there. There's a lot of them. And if they don't go fairly soon into Ukraine, morale is not going to hold up to enable Putin to move them in any forceful manner in another couple of weeks. If he's going to go, he's got to go in the next week or so. So that's why we're entering this period of sort of maximum danger, if you like. If the West can do enough just to make him hesitate or hang around for a bit longer, then the moment may pass. And it may be that we can just by being worried almost, we can push him slightly back from the brink and get it to the point where he can't actually get cold, chilly, depressed conscripts to do the things that he would need them to do. The moment he can do it, and he's obviously using a lot of rhetoric, but Putin's got a lot of things to distract from at home as well. There's 1 million people in Russia who've died from COVID. There's very poor uptake of the vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine, which he half-inched from the rest of the world. Doesn't work very well. So he's got lots of things to cover up, and he doesn't really want a big war with the West. But Afghanistan and our shockingly bad withdrawal from there shows that the West isn't prepared to go and fight wars anymore to protect our borders or our own safety. So, he's gambling to some extent that he's going to be allowed to roll into Ukraine without anything more than a harsh word. And I think does happen. The West isn't going to be able to hold him to that. They're going to have to react.
Madeline, the big question is, what does Vladimir Putin want exactly?
Yes, indeed, that is the question. And his policy, his sort of approach to warfare, of the hybrid approach, whereby you deploy ground troops, but all other manner of other tactics all at once, it proves deeply confusing to Western observers. But Susie's absolutely right that the only real the best deterrents that we have are serious shows of strength and proper economic sanctions. And so far, there has been some strengthening of the sanctions from the British side, but to make it truly explicit would go further, as well as clamping down properly, which is something we have avoided thus far, clamping down properly on the kind of dirty money that siphons its way through London, and potentially going after some of the kind of lower level oligarchy that are allowed to thrive in London, but in other cities in Europe and in America and further afield. It seems that there are further things that could be done that aren't simply military.
To the Times, world pages are inside the newspaper. This interesting article just suggesting that giving up warheads has left Ukraine weak. This is a Cold War general comment piece. Susie.
Yeah, so their reporter Anthony Lloyd has done a great job. He's found Ukrainian general who used to be sort of maintaining the missiles, the nuclear missiles, which were based in Ukraine. They had like the third largest stockpile in the world after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it kind of, in terms of the mutually assured deterrent, it kept everybody at bay. And it also meant that Ukraine had an importance on the world stage. Now, in the mid-90s, the UK and Russia agreed to sort of that this stockpile would be disbanded and done away with, and that Ukraine would be a non-nuclear country from then on. And that part of all that, according to Anthony, was that that Ukraine was going to be sort of, was going to be safe from all sides. But they're saying that because they gave up those missiles, that's why Putin now sees them as a pawn in his great game of expansionism against the West and NATO. And that's what you've got here, is you've got one country, Russia, trying to be bigger than it is now, and as big and important as it used to be, trying to be a superpower again. You've got NATO, which some people want to act like a superpower, but which isn't. It's made up of lots of different groups that want to do different things. And they're arguing over a country of 40 million people. Those people don't want to be Russian. They don't want to be anything, particularly they want to be Ukrainian.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we must take a break now, I fear. We're going to get much more from you after the break coming up. How Boris Johnson might defend himself over an alleged party in his Downing Street flat. More to come. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. Still with me, Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant. Welcome back to both of you. Let us have a look at the eye. And this, I've got to read out this quote first of all, that will pop up hopefully on the screen. Other colleagues astonished by his survival say, if I ever get invited to his funeral, I'm going to lift the lid on that coffin to make sure he's in there, because I'm not convinced he will be. Who are we talking about? Starter for 10, Madeline.
Could it be the Prime Minister that we're talking about? I mean, it's a wonderful quote from the Eye. It's just a Tory colleague of the Prime Minister who's simply astonished at his capacity for survival. And it's really interesting because, things are moving very quickly in politics at the moment, but it wasn't long ago that, even a couple of weeks ago, that the Prime Minister's position looked completely untenable, not just in the long term, but in the short term too. But in fact, as people very often say of Boris Johnson, he's an extraordinarily lucky politician. And so far, various things have happened which have helped him and have made the rebellion lose steam. Things like Christian Wakeford crossing the floor, yesterday's attack from John Major, which probably played into his hands, and also an attempt to change the rules of the 1922 committee to make it easier to depose him. So on that basis, Boris Johnson and his old luck seems to be surviving. But interestingly, some senior Tories, including the former leader Ian Duncan Smith, have warned the Prime Minister against trying to cling on to power again if he is found by the Met Police to have broken COVID laws and receives a fine for it. So it's a reminder that even though the position, which seemed to be stabilising a little bit, is still fundamentally extremely wobbly, and the intervention from
I think we've lost Madeline.
Ian Duncan Smith is a good reminder that he's some way from being out with.
We lost you for a second there, Madeline. Just to bring Susie in, you've got about 30 seconds. The Telegraph tells us that Boris Johnson is to deny breaking any law at that infamous party.
Well, of course he is. He's denied everything so far. I'm not entirely sure what the power of the Conservative Party is going to be to control him, though, because I don't think he necessarily considers himself to be a member of it. He's never been particularly beloved by the parliamentary party. He's not a sort of a natural Tory, despite some of his background. And I think at the moment he's doing everything he can to buy off some of his backbenchers to win their support
Susie,
for their causes.